Have you ever felt like you were invisible in your own family? Like no matter how hard you tried, you were destined to remain in the shadows? Emma asked herself as she stared at the worn-out ceiling of her childhood bedroom. She had known for as long as she could remember that in her family, she was the second choice. Her brother, Michael, was the star, the golden child, and she was just the backdrop to his brilliance. From the moment Michael took his first steps, her parents seemed to orbit around him. He was gifted, they said, as if Emma's own accomplishments were ordinary in comparison. Michael's talents were nurtured and celebrated, while Emma's interests were dismissed as fleeting whims. When Michael expressed an interest in singing, their parents stretched the family budget to enroll him in expensive voice lessons and buy him top-of-the-line equipment. Meanwhile, Emma's quiet request to join an art class was met with an apologetic smile and the same tired excuse, "Maybe next semester, sweetheart." Michael's lessons are taking up the budget right now. The disparity in attention was undeniable, yet subtle enough to pass as normal. Their mother's proud declarations of Michael's potential filled the house like a song on repeat. "Michael's voice is a gift," she would gush to anyone who would listen. "He's going to do something extraordinary." Emma, sitting quietly in the corner with her sketchbook, learned early on to expect little acknowledgement. Dinner conversations revolved around Michael's latest achievements, a ribbon at a singing competition, a lead role in the school play, or glowing feedback from his teachers. Emma's achievements, a straight-A report card or a detailed art project, were briefly acknowledged before the spotlight swung back to her brother. When Michael reached his senior year of high school, the favoritism reached its peak. At the dinner table one night, their father made an announcement that lit up Michael's face and extinguished Emma's hope all at once. "We've been saving up," he said proudly. "Michael, we're sending you to Preston College. It's one of the best schools in the state. And you can stay in the apartment near campus," their mother added, her voice brimming with excitement. "No rent, of course. We want you to focus on your studies." Emma sat quietly, pushing her peas around her plate as the reality settled in. If her parents were pouring all their resources into Michael's education and living expenses, there would be nothing left for her. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Emma felt the sting of being overlooked. But instead of letting the resentment consume her, she felt something else spark within her, a quiet determination. If her family wouldn't invest in her future, she would carve her own path. The next morning, Emma walked into her grandparents' antique shop and made her case. "I need to save for college," she said firmly. Her grandfather studied her for a moment before nodding. "All right," he said, a proud smile spreading across his face. "You're hired." The day Michael packed his bags for Preston College was a grand occasion in the Miller household. Suitcases lined a hallway, and their parents buzzed around, making last-minute arrangements. Michael was all smiles, soaking up the attention as their mother handed him a set of keys to the family's apartment near campus. "This will give you the space to focus on your studies," she said, her voice dripping with pride. Emma stood in the background, watching the scene unfold. There were no heartfelt goodbyes for her, no promises of future plans. She knew, deep down, that her parents saw Michael's success as the family's success. Anything she achieved would merely be an afterthought. That night, lying in her bed, Emma stared at the ceiling, the weight of her circumstances pressing down on her. Her parents had made it clear they couldn't, or wouldn't, support her dreams. But for the first time, instead of feeling defeated, she felt resolute. If they weren't going to help her, she'd help herself. The next morning, she walked into her grandparents' antique store, a cozy shop that smelled of aged wood and history. Her grandfather, an observant man with a knack for spotting determination, raised an eyebrow as she approached. "Grandpa," she began, her voice steady, "I need a way to save for college. I don't want to rely on Mom and Dad. Can you help me?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "I could just give you the money," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But I think it would mean more if you earned it. How about you work here after schools?" Emma's heart leapt. "I'd love to." From that day on, Emma's routine changed completely. After school, while her friends hung out at the mall or went to practice, she headed straight to the antique store. The work wasn't glamorous, but she embraced it. She learned to catalog items, negotiate with customers, and even appraise the value of vintage pieces. Her grandparents were patient teachers, sharing stories about the treasures that filled the shop. Her favorite moments were when her grandmother would bring her tea and sit with her, weaving tales about the history behind a particular set of china or an old grandfather clock. Emma soaked it all in, not just the knowledge of the antiques, but the life lessons hidden in their stories. Despite the long hours and occasional challenges, Emma felt a sense of pride that she'd never experienced before. She was earning her own money, proving to herself that she didn't need anyone to hand her opportunities. For the first time, her future felt like something she could shape with her own hands. Her parents' reaction to her newfound independence was telling. When Emma shared her plans to save for college through her job at the antique store, they seemed almost relieved. "That's great, honey," her mother said with a wave of her hand. "It's good that you're taking initiative." Their reaction confirmed what Emma had long suspected. They had no intention of helping her financially. Any guilt they might have felt about pouring their resources into Michael was overshadowed by their relief that Emma was managing on her own. Years of working hard after school passed quickly. Emma saved diligently, setting aside every paycheck with a singular focus: college. Her grandparents watched her transformation with quiet pride, often slipping her small bonuses when she least expected it. "You're doing something special, Emma," her grandfather told her one evening as they closed up shop. "You're building a life on your terms." As Emma turned the shop lights off and locked the door that night, she smiled to herself. She wasn't just saving for college. She was learning responsibility, resilience, and independence. And while Michael basked in the glow of his parents' unwavering support, Emma knew she was building something far more valuable: her own future, free of anyone else's terms. When Emma walked onto the campus of Riverside State College for the first time, it felt like stepping into a new world. The bustling students, the towering buildings, and the promise of new opportunities filled her with a cautious excitement. She had made it here on her own. Every penny saved, every late shift worked at the antique store was proof of her determination. Her parents had barely commented when she announced her acceptance. "That's great, honey," her mom had said distractedly. "We're so proud of you." But Emma had learned not to rely on their words for validation. Her pride came from within. Emma quickly settled into a rhythm. Her mornings were spent in lecture halls, afternoons at her part-time job at a local cafe, and evenings studying late into the night in her small, shared dorm room. The cafe work was exhausting, but it paid enough to cover her living expenses and tuition. She lived frugally, packing lunches, skipping nights out, and taking the bus everywhere. The stark contrast between her life and Michael's was impossible to ignore. While she navigated her budget carefully, Michael's Instagram feed showcased a life of ease and indulgence. He posted photos from Preston's lush campus, nights out with friends, and weekend getaways. Their parents' contributions to his lifestyle were evident. The apartment they had provided was fully furnished, and they sent him monthly allowances for essentials. Emma didn't resent Michael's privileges anymore. She'd grown past that. But a quiet ache lingered, a wish that her parents had even a fraction of the pride in her that they did for him. That ache resurfaced in full force during Michael's graduation. The Millers pulled out all the stops for their son's big day. The house was transformed into a celebration venue, complete with catered food, live music, and a guest list that seemed to include half the town. Emma helped in the background, setting up tables and arranging appetizers, while Michael basked in the glow of their parents' praise. When he entered the party, hand in hand with his beaming fiancée, Sarah, the room erupted in cheers. "Everyone," Michael announced, raising his glass, "Sarah and I have some big news. We're engaged." Emma watched from the corner as their parents burst into tears of joy and hugged them both. It was as if every moment of the evening was designed to highlight Michael's success and happiness. She wondered if anyone even noticed she was there. Her own graduation, 3 years later, couldn't have been more different. Emma had earned a perfect 4.0 GPA, but there were no grand parties, no overflowing guest list. Her parents didn't even offer to attend the ceremony, instead suggesting a quiet dinner at home. The meal was modest, cooked by Emma herself, and the only guests were her grandparents. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," her grandmother said warmly, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Graduating with top honors while working part-time. That's no small feat." Emma smiled, grateful for their support, but the rest of the evening was a painful reminder of her place in the family. Her mother's phone buzzed with a message from Michael, and within minutes, the dinner had shifted focus. "Michael says the business is expanding," her mom gushed. "2 new locations. Isn't that amazing?" Her father beamed with pride. That boy's always been destined for greatness. Emma didn't bother pointing out that she had just achieved something remarkable. She simply sipped her water and let the conversation wash over her. By now, she was used to being overlooked. If Michael's graduation had been a spectacle, his wedding was a full-blown production. Over the next year, their parents threw themselves into planning the event, taking out a substantial loan to ensure it was perfect. No expense was spared. The venue was lavish, the catering top-tier, and the flowers exquisite. Meanwhile, Emma juggled her final year of college and her part-time job, scraping together what she could to cover her modest expenses. She wasn't even asked to be in the wedding party until Sarah insisted she serve as a bridesmaid, a role Emma had to pay for out of her own pocket. The wedding day came, and Emma stood on the sidelines in a pastel dress, watching her parents beam with pride as they danced with the newlyweds. She couldn't help but compare this moment to her quiet graduation dinner. But instead of feeling bitter, Emma felt a newfound sense of clarity. She realized she didn't need their approval or validation. She'd made it this far on her own, and she would keep pushing forward. While her parents poured their energy and resources into Michael, Emma had built something far more valuable, a sense of self-reliance and the determination to create a life that was truly her own. Standing there in the shadow of her brother's extravagant celebration, Emma resolved that her triumphs, no matter how quietly achieved, would always be hers to cherish. After Michael and Sarah left for Connecticut to begin their new chapter, Emma saw an opportunity to claim a slice of independence for herself. The apartment Michael had lived in during college was now empty, conveniently located near her campus. It wasn't extravagant, but to Emma, it represented freedom, a space that could finally be her own. One evening, as her parents sat watching TV, she broached the subject. "Mom, Dad, since Michael's apartment is empty now, would it be okay if I moved in? It's so close to campus, and it would make my last year much easier." Her mother exchanged a glance with her father before responding. "Well, honey, you can move in, but you'll need to pay rent." Emma blinked, taken aback. "Rent?" Michael lived there for free during college. "That was different," her father said, shifting uncomfortably. "We were in a better financial position then. With the wedding loan, we really can't afford to let you stay rent-free." The words stung, but Emma didn't argue. She'd learned long ago that fairness wasn't something she could expect from her parents. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll pay the rent." That weekend, she moved into the apartment. It still bore traces of Michael, faint outlines on the walls where his posters had been, and the lingering scent of his cologne. But Emma was determined to make it her own. She worked extra shifts at the cafe, often staying until closing to ensure she could cover the rent while balancing her demanding school schedule. The days were long, and sleep became a luxury, but she persevered. Emma's hard work paid off. By the time she graduated, she had not only maintained a perfect GPA, but also secured a job offer from Anderson and Mitchell, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. The starting salary was beyond anything she'd imagined, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her sacrifices lift. She had made it entirely on her own. Graduation day came and went without much acknowledgement from her parents. There was no party, no family gathering, just a quiet dinner at home. Her grandparents celebrated her achievement, showering her with love and pride, but her parents' attention remained elsewhere. "Michael says the baby's learning to walk," her mother said at the table, showing everyone a video on her phone. Emma simply smiled and let it go. She'd stopped expecting anything more. 3 days into her new job, Emma got a call from her mother. "Hi, sweetheart," her mom began, her tone unnaturally cheerful. Your dad and I were talking, and since you're making such good money now, we think it's fair that you start paying double rent. Emma froze, clutching the phone tightly. Double rent? Why? Well, her mom continued, there are more expenses now, and with the wedding loan and everything, we could really use the extra income. Emma felt a rush of disbelief. You're asking me to pay double rent for an apartment where Michael stayed for free for years? I'm your daughter too. That was a different time, her dad interjected. We didn't have these financial pressures back then. You can afford it, Emma. You should be happy to help. Her parents' casual entitlement left her speechless. After years of being treated as an afterthought, Emma had finally drawn a line. Fine, she said tightly. I'll think about it. That night, Emma opened her laptop and started browsing apartment listings. If her parents wanted to squeeze her for every penny, she wasn't going to let them. She found a modern one-bedroom unit closer to her new office. The rent was reasonable, and the thought of living free from her family's constant demands felt like a breath of fresh air. The next month, as the rent deadline approached, her mother called again. Emma, don't forget, we're expecting the new amount this Friday. Emma smiled to herself. Actually, Mom, I've moved out. The apartment is all yours now. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What? You can't just leave. I already have, Emma said calmly. You wanted double rent, and I've decided to use that money to live somewhere I actually enjoy. Good luck finding someone else to pay for your financial pressures. Her mother sputtered in disbelief, but Emma didn't stay on the line long enough to hear her response. For the first time in her life, she felt completely free. Her new apartment was small but cozy, and for the first time, Emma had a space that was truly hers. No guilt, no manipulation, no being overshadowed by her brother. As she sat on her new couch, sipping a cup of coffee she'd brewed just for herself, Emma smiled. She had earned every bit of her independence, and no one could take it away. Emma was halfway through her second year at Anderson and Mitchell when the call came. Her mother's voice on the other end was tight with tension. Emma, we need to talk about your brother. There's been trouble. Trouble, as it turned out, was an understatement. Michael's business had collapsed spectacularly, leaving him broke and unemployed. The fallout had been catastrophic, a messy fight with Sarah's parents, the loss of their home, and mounting debts. He's coming back home, her mom explained, with Sarah and the baby. Emma's stomach sank as the inevitable dawned on her. They're not moving into my apartment, are they? Well, her mother began, her tone suddenly defensive. The apartment is plenty big, and it's better suited for a family. You're just one person, Emma. It only makes sense. What about me? This is my home. I pay rent. Her father's voice cut in. It's temporary, Emma. Your brother's been through a lot. You'll understand, won't you? Emma didn't, but it didn't matter. A week later, Michael, Sarah, and their crying baby, Tommy, arrived with an overwhelming amount of luggage. Their mother supervised the move, barking orders like a drill sergeant. Emma, clear out your room. The baby needs a nursery. Emma froze. Where am I supposed to sleep? Her mother's response was infuriatingly casual. The couch, of course. It's perfectly comfortable. She wanted to argue, to demand fairness, but years of being dismissed held her back. Instead, she moved her belongings into the cramped living room, stacking boxes next to the couch that was now her makeshift bed. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Michael spent his days sulking, glued to his phone, and scrolling through job listings he had no intention of applying for. Sarah alternated between passive-aggressive comments and outright complaints about the apartment being too small. The baby cried incessantly, adding to the chaos. Emma worked long hours at her demanding job, only to come home to a cluttered, noisy apartment. The sink was perpetually filled with dirty dishes, and her groceries disappeared faster than she could replenish them. She tried to keep her frustration in check, but it boiled over one evening when she returned to find Sarah hosting a playdate for Tommy and another baby. Toys littered the floor, and every surface was sticky with baby food. Emma pulled Michael aside. This isn't working. You're not contributing anything, and I'm paying for everything here. Can't you at least help out? Michael looked at her like she'd suggested something absurd. Emma, I'm going through a rough time. I don't need this stress right now. The entitlement in his tone was staggering. Stress? Emma snapped. Do you have any idea what I deal with every day? I'm working full-time, paying rent, and sleeping on a couch while you— Enough, he interrupted. This is temporary. Stop making a big deal out of it. Emma bit back her retort, knowing it was pointless. The dynamic hadn't changed since childhood. Michael was the star, and she was expected to endure quietly. Her breaking point came 2 weeks later. Late one night, while working on a project for her job, Emma overheard Michael and Sarah talking in the kitchen. Their voices were hushed, but the smugness was unmistakable. Can you believe it? Sarah giggled. Your mom told me they're funneling half of Emma's rent money back to us. We're basically living here for free. Michael chuckled. Of course. Mom and Dad know we need help right now. Emma makes plenty of money. She can support us for a while. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. So, this was the truth. Her hard-earned money wasn't just keeping the apartment afloat. It was being funneled to fund Michael and Sarah's freeloading lifestyle. Any lingering guilt she felt about leaving evaporated. That night, Emma opened her laptop and finalized her search for a new apartment. She found a one-bedroom unit that was closer to her office, reasonably priced, and, most importantly, free of family drama. The next morning, she signed the lease and paid the deposit. Moving out was a stealth operation. She packed her essentials into a few suitcases, leaving behind furniture and anything tied to her family's manipulation. At dawn, she slipped out quietly, leaving a note on the counter. When her mother called later that day, Emma let it go to voicemail. The message was predictably indignant. Emma, how could you just leave? What about your brother? We need your rent money. Emma didn't respond. Instead, she blocked her parents' numbers and leaned back on the couch in her new apartment. The silence was blissful. No crying baby, no arguing couple, no guilt-laden demands. Weeks passed, and life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Emma embraced her independence, thriving in her career and enjoying the simplicity of a space that was entirely hers. Then one day, her grandmother called with an update. Michael and Sarah are still at the old apartment, she said, her tone a mix of sympathy and exasperation. Your parents are paying all the bills now. Michael hasn't even tried to find a job. Emma sighed, her resolve only strengthened. That's their choice, Grandma. I'm done being part of it. For the first time in her life, Emma felt free, not just physically, but emotionally. Her family could continue their cycle, but she was no longer tethered to it. She had built her own path, and she wasn't looking back. Emma's new apartment became her sanctuary. For the first time in years, she had peace. No crying baby, no entitled siblings, no endless demands. She furnished the space slowly, picking out each piece of furniture herself, relishing the freedom to create a home that reflected her. Even something as simple as coming home to a clean kitchen or finding her groceries untouched felt like a luxury. Her parents, however, were less content with her newfound independence. Calls from her mother came regularly at first, each one more demanding than the last. Emma, you can't just cut us off like this. Michael needs help. Emma didn't flinch. She'd learned to protect her boundaries.
No, Mom.
I've given enough. You can figure it out. With that, she ended the call and, after weeks of guilt-tripping voicemails, blocked their numbers. The updates came instead through her grandparents. Michael and Sarah were still living in the apartment, entirely dependent on her parents, who were now struggling to pay the bills. Your parents are enabling him, her grandfather said one day, shaking his head. But you were right to step away. It's not your burden. Emma threw herself into her career, and her hard work paid off. Within 2 years, she earned a promotion, a substantial raise, and the respect of her peers. She even started taking evening MBA classes, further solidifying the future she was building for herself. Looking back, Emma felt no bitterness, only relief. Cutting ties with her family's dysfunction had been difficult, but it was the best decision she'd ever made. For the first time, she was putting herself first, and the results were undeniable: peace, growth, and success. Her life was finally her own, and she had never felt prouder of the person she had become.